Friends, if you want to watch super hit movie Central Intelligence in English, then you must like this video if you are visiting our channel for the first time. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Friends, in today's video, the movie we are going to talk about is called Central Intelligence. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch it all. Interesting facts about this movie. In today's video, I'm going to tell you. I'm also going to give you all the information on which OTT platform or on which satellite channel you will get to watch this movie. Also, we will talk in detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production filming, post-production budget, box office collection of this film. We will also talk about the story of this film, and I will also give you a small review of the story of this film. Apart from this, we will discuss about the facts of this film storyline, starcast, actors' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. That's why I request you friends to watch this video till the end, so let's start the video. Central Intelligence is a 2016 American buddy action comedy film directed by Rawson Marshall Thurber and written by Thurber, Ike Barinholtz, and David Stassen. The film stars Dwayne Johnson and Kevin Hart as two old high school classmates who go on the run after one of them joins the CIA to save the world from a terrorist who intends to sell satellite codes. The film premiered in Los Angeles on June 10, 2016, and was theatrically released in the United States on June 17, 2016. Central Intelligence received praise from critics for Johnson and Hart's performances, but criticism for the script, and was commercially successful, grossing over $217 million worldwide against its $60 million budget. Plot: in 1996, star athlete Calvin the Golden Jet Joyner is being honored at his school, Central High. Halfway through his speech, a group of bullies led by Trevor Olson throws the morbidly obese nerd Robbie Weirdiched, who was taking a shower and dancing happily to My Lovin', You're Never Gonna Get It, on a radio in the boys' locker room, naked into the gymnasium in the middle of an assembly. Everyone starts laughing except for Joyner and his girlfriend, Maggie Johnson, who are the only ones sympathetic towards Weirdiched, the former even going as far as to quickly cover him with his varsity jacket in a moment of compassion. He thanks Joyner and flees in humiliation and embarrassment. 20 years later, Joyner is married to Maggie and works as a forensic accountant, but is dissatisfied with his career. She suggests they see a therapist to salvage their deteriorating marriage. At work, Joyner receives a friend request on Facebook from Bob Stone, who invites him to meet at a bar. Stone reveals himself to be Weirdiched, who has transformed into a muscular, fit, confident man with advanced hand-to-hand combat skills. After a bar fight and tour of the school, Stone asks Joyner to review some online transactions, and he discovers a multi-million-dollar auction with bidders from radical countries, with the final bids set to conclude the following day. The next morning, a team of CIA agents led by Pamela Harris arrives at Joyner's in search of Stone, who shockingly vanished after sleeping on Joyner's couch. Harris tells Joyner that he is a dangerous rogue agent who murdered his former partner, Phil Stanton. Harris tells Joyner that Stone intends to sell satellite codes to the highest bidder. Soon after, Stone abducts him, explaining that he is trying to stop a mysterious criminal called the Black Badger from selling the codes, but needs Joyner's skills to locate the meeting place. After an attack by a bounty hunter, Joyner flees and calls Maggie, telling her to meet him at the marriage counselor's office. Harris intercepts him, telling him that Stone is the Black Badger. She warns him to not tell Maggie and gives him a device to alert them to Stone's location. Joyner meets Maggie for their marriage counseling session, where Stone is posing as the counselor. Stone convinces Joyner to help him, so he sets up a meeting with Olson, who can track the offshore account for the auction to get the deal's location. Olson feigns an apology for bullying Stone before once again antagonizing him. Harris calls Joyner and threatens to arrest Maggie if he fails to help them detain Stone. Joyner reluctantly betrays him, and the CIA arrests him. As Harris tortures Stone to get his confession, Joyner helps him escape and discovers the deal is happening in a Boston Underground parking garage and helps Stone steal a plane. Stone enters alone, while Joyner watches Harris entering a short while later. Assuming that she is the Black Badger, he runs after her, only to find Stone meeting with the buyer and claiming to be the Black Badger. Stone shoots Joyner, grazing his neck to keep him safe. Stanton arrives, having faked his death, and reveals himself to be the Black Badger. A fight breaks out, and Stanton reveals his plan to frame Stone for the crime. Stone kills him by ripping his throat out. Joyner and he make it to their 20th high school reunion. Upon arriving, Joyner reconciles with Maggie and promises to improve their marriage. The new prom king is announced to be Stone. Joyner reveals to Maggie that he hacked the school's voting system to make it happen. Olson shows up to bully Stone again, but he finally stands up for himself and punches him unconscious. In Stone's acceptance speech, he reveals that he is Weirdict, cites the importance of overcoming obstacles, and praises Joyner as his best friend. He then relives his most embarrassing incident on his terms by stripping. Stone then encounters his high school crush Darla Maguchian, whom he proceeds to share a kiss and dance with. Sometime later, Maggie is now pregnant and Joyner has joined Stone in the CIA. As a gift for his first day on the job, Stone returns Joyner's varsity jacket. Cast Dwayne Johnson as Bob Stone. Robbie Weirdict, a former bullied, morbidly obese, friendless, socially awkward high school student turned big-bodied CIA agent and hand-to-hand combatant who is a movie fan obsessed with 16 Candles and Roadhouse. Sion Kalepi as young Robbie Weirdict, body double. Kevin Hart as Calvin Golden Jet Joyner, a former popular star athlete who went to high school with Robbie, now working as an accountant. Amy Ryan as Agent Pamela Harris, a CIA agent who suspects Bob is a rogue agent. Aaron Paul as Philip Phil Stanton, Bob's former partner, who is believed to be dead after apparently being killed in action. Danielle Nicolay as Maggie Joyner, Calvin's high school sweetheart now turned wife. Timothy John Smith as Agent Nicholas Nick Cooper. Megan Park as Lexi, the waitress in the bar. Thomas Kretschmann as the buyer, a man who wants to buy U.S. satellite codes. Jason Bateman as Trevor Olson, a former high school student who bullied Robbie in the past. Dylan Boyack as young Trevor. Melissa McCarthy as Darla Maguchian, uncredited, Robbie's former high school crush. Kumail Nanjiani as Jared, the airport security guard. Ryan Hansen as Steve. Production, development. The script was greenlit by Universal Pictures in 2010, and Rawson Marshall Thurber was selected to direct and started to write the script together with Ike Barinholtz and David Stassen. Before production began, Thurber convinced New Line Cinema to buy the script, and the studio became the film's domestic distributor through Warner Bros. Pictures. That year, Dwayne Johnson was cast alongside Kevin Hart. Filming. Principal photography began on May 6, 2015, and took place in Atlanta, Georgia, and throughout various Massachusetts locations, including Boston, Burlington, Lynn, Middleton, Winchester, and Quincy. Principal photography ended in July 2015. To promote the film, Johnson and Hart had an Instagram war against each other on set. Release. Theatrical. The film premiered at the Regency Village Theater on June 10, 2016. Warner Bros. Handled distribution in the United States, where the film opened on June 17, 2016, while Universal covered global distribution, as the film was released between June and July 2016. Home media. Central Intelligence was released on digital HD on September 13, 2016, before being released on DVD, Blu-ray, and 4K Ultra HD on September 27, 2016. Reception. Box office. Central Intelligence grossed $127.4 million in North America and $89.5 million in other territories for a worldwide total of $260.9 million, against a budget of $60 million. Deadline Hollywood calculated the net profit of the film to be $122 million when factoring together all expenses and revenues for the film. Central Intelligence opened on June 17, 2016, alongside Finding Dory, and was projected to gross around $30 million from 3,508 theaters in its opening weekend. The film grossed $1.8 million from its Thursday previews and $13 million on its first day. The film went on to gross $35.5 million, finishing second at the box office behind fellow newcomer Finding Dory, $135.1 million. Critical response. On Rotten Tomatoes, Central Intelligence has an approval rating of 71%, based on 184 reviews, with an average rating of 5.7610. The site's critical consensus reads, Kevin Hart and Dwayne Johnson make for well-matched comic foils, helping Central Intelligence overcome a script that coasts on their considerable chemistry. On Metacritic, the film has a weighted average score of 52 out of 100 based on 35 critics, indicating mixed or average reviews. Audiences polled by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of A- on an A+ to F scale, while PostTrack reported filmgoers gave it a 75% overall positive score and a 55% definite recommend. Peter Travers of Rolling Stone gave the film 2 out of 4 stars, writing, "If you're expecting the story threads to cohere, you're in the wrong multiplex." Central Intelligence always takes the lazy way out. You go along for the ride because Hart and Johnson promise something they can't deliver, a movie as funny as they are. Ignacy Vishnevetsky of the AV Club criticized the film as a shambolic high-concept farce that doubles as a cautionary tale of where studio comedies go wrong, writing, "In spots as indifferent and self-indulgent as any latter-day Adam Sandler production. Intelligence switches back and forth from snail-paced to incoherently overstuffed on a moment's notice, with no in-between mode." Keith Phipps of Uproxx gave the film a positive review, saying, "It all adds up to the sort of breezy, undemanding comedy that fits nicely into the summer months and plays beautifully in endless cable repeats." Future. In November 2021, writer-director Rawson Marshall Thurber stated that a sequel had been in development before being delayed in favor of the collaboration between Johnson and Hart in the Jumanji sequels. There's a kitchen fight in Central Intelligence, pitting a man with a butcher knife against a man with a banana. The man with the banana wins. I love scenes like this, where the movie seems to be saying, "This is the kind of movie I am, the kind where you can kill a man with a banana. Enjoy." And you do. The film is a buddy action comedy in the vein of The In-Laws and Midnight Run, with a splash of 1930s movie slapstick. Kevin Hart plays Calvin Joyner, a deadpan worrywart who was voted most likely to succeed in high school. He has a good job and a charming wife, but still feels like a failure. Dwayne Johnson plays his old high school classmate, Robert Weirdich, aka Bob Stone, a bullied fat kid who grew up to become a muscular CIA agent, but still wears a fanny pack and can't stop talking about 16 candles. Bob is 6'4" and built like an action figure, which comes in handy in scenes that require him to do battle with a nunchaku-wielding assassin on a motorbike, or pirouette through a battle zone, tossing tiny explosives from his fanny pack like Bugs Bunny as Brynhilde strewing flower petals in her wake. Bob says he just wants to hang out with Calvin, the only guy in high school who was ever nice to him, on the eve of their 20th high school reunion. He's secretly a renegade agent accused of killing his partner and committing treason, and he needs Calvin's accounting expertise to thwart a terrorist plot and clear his name. But his adoration of Calvin is sincere. He loves Calvin the way little kids love superheroes, worships him, adores him. He tells Calvin he needs his help and asks if he's out or in. Calvin says he's not in. Bob says he's in, that he was always in. Calvin wants to know why Bob asked him if he was in or out, if he was always in regardless. Bob says it's because he wanted to feel the pride and excitement of hearing Calvin tell him he's in. "I'm not in," Calvin says. Calvin says this again and again, all through the movie. "I'm not in." He screams it while Bob is pushing him in a mail cart through a hail of gunfire and telling him to relax. Everything's going to be fine. This is their relationship. And the best thing about this movie is that you believe in the relationship. Hart and Johnson are a classic comedy duo in the tradition of Abbott and Costello, Bob Hope and Bing Crosby, and Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor. And they certainly have the silhouettes for it. When the two stand side by side, their height difference is so great that they become iconic, the genie and the man who summoned him. But the film also takes them seriously as characters with dashed hopes and unrealized aspirations, men who feel things deeply even though they try not to show it. They bicker, yell at each other, and get drawn into circuitous conversations that have little to do with the mission. Hart is playing a mid-period Matthew Broderick character, an emotionally constipated everyman who sounds like he's trying to be polite even when he's hollering about some cockamamie plan that Bob has roped him into. When a burly CIA agent hands him an iPad that was supposed to show images that would frighten him, he stares at the iPad for just exactly the right length of time before quietly stating, "That's Pornhub." Bob is Calvin's UD, lying to him and manipulating him to draw him into dangerous situations. But he's also his voice of conscience, urging Calvin to act like the shining example of bravery and kindness that Bob always knew him to be. Johnson, who's become a fearless comic actor as well as a great action star, does the best work of his career as Bob. Calvin calls him Jason Bourne in jorts, but despite the fact that Bob can kill a man with anything, even a banana, and has a mysteriously chilly and chill quality that makes Calvin wonder if those awful stories about him are true, he's a sweetie pie, a Great Dane puppy bounding through the movie. Johnson's aura of decency permits us to root for a man who is as obliviously selfish as a child, a one-man wrecking crew demanding Calvin's full attention. "I'll never be like Molly Ringwald," Bob laments. He means it. It's tearing him up inside. Each man embodies the other's unfulfilled fantasies of real success. Bob is the badass knight in shining armor that Calvin was told he was destined to become. Bob aspires to have a relationship as stable and nurturing as the one Calvin has with his one-time high school girlfriend turned wife, Maggie, Danielle Nicolet. Calvin thinks he's a little man, in every sense, a man of no importance, but Bob Stone would not exist without him. And yet Bob is still a scared kid inside, a truth conveyed in expressionistic scenes of humiliation that replay in reflected surfaces and even behind Bob's head, like a movie that Bob has literally turned his back on because he can't bear to watch it. Bob Stone is a magnificent comic creation, a man who exhorts his friend to be the hero of his own story because it worked for Bob, and who never stops searching the text of his world for bits of foreshadowing, for signs and symbols. But he wouldn't have the same impact if Calvin weren't there beside him, babbling anxiously and improvising whopping lies when big men threatened to kill him. The two complete each other in an ungainly yet perfect way, like the centaurs that serve as the duo's high school mascot. Central Intelligence is written by Ike Barinholtz, David Stassen, and Rawson Marshall Thurber, and directed by Thurber, who also did We're the Millers and Dodgeball, two of the better recent examples of the smart, dumb comedy. It may not be a deep and complex masterpiece that will spawn symposiums and appreciations. It's the kind of movie that you watch on TV for the fourth or fifth time when you're supposed to be doing more important things, because it's still funny, and because you believe in the big man and the small man that he looks up to. Review by Lydia Creech. I'm going to tell you a secret. I thought Central Intelligence was funnier than The Nice Guys, the other buddy cop type movie of the summer. It may not be as tightly scripted a thriller, but the chemistry and role reversal Dwayne Johnson and Kevin Hart bring to the screen is delightful, and it felt good to laugh at something not coming from a dark place. Hart plays Calvin Golden Jet Joyner, who is shown at the beginning of the film receiving a most likely to be successful award right before high school graduation. He's popular and driven and well-liked, and everyone is sure he'll go far. Cut to 20 years later, right before high school reunion, and he is stuck in a mid-level position at an accounting firm, feeling like he may have peaked all those years ago. Johnson, on the other hand, plays Robbie Weirdich, who starts the film as a friendless fat kid and the victim of a very cruel prank by the high school bullies. Now, he's grown up to be The Rock and a CIA agent, and he never forgot Hart's small act of kindness to him, leading him to looking Calvin up and inviting him out for a drink. Soon, Hart is involved in international espionage and black market deals and double crossings and satellite codes. It doesn't really matter. The spy plot is a little bit nonsense and thin, but what does shine through is the charisma and comedy prowess of the two leads. Johnson's Robbie is a cheerfully weird dude who wears a fanny pack and likes unicorns, and you can tell Johnson's having a blast playing against type. Hart makes a great straight man, far less shrieky and gay panicky and Napoleon complexy than I've seen him before. Well, a little bit those things, but less. So, even if you find his usual style annoying, he's worth checking out here. Together, they play off each other's comedic personas to produce several laugh-out-loud moments. This is the main difference between the laughs from Central Intelligence and The Nice Guys. I certainly smirked at the jokes in The Nice Guys. It's a movie that shines a light on human ugliness and absurdity and tells us we're better than the characters. Central Intelligence's jokes may poke fun at Robbie's weirdness or Calvin's fish out of water status, and it unabashedly goes for the sentimental ending, but it's a sentimentality that feels earned. Calvin and Robbie want to do the right thing, and it's not pettiness or incompetence or laziness that prevents them. The comedy isn't mean-spirited or punching down, and sometimes it's nice to take a break from bleak and grim. Ultimately, Central Intelligence may not display the same level of craft or acerbic verbal wit that The Nice Guys does, but it is the perfect light summer fun. I would be happy to see another Johnson-Hart pairing in the future, perhaps with a stronger plot to go along with their talent. In the meantime, Central Intelligence can be a palate cleanser before the next batch of black comedies. I really wasn't sure whether or not I wanted to give my time over to Central Intelligence. Despite the fact that I'm a huge fan of Dwayne Johnson, and despite the fact that I always tend to at least chuckle at Kevin Hart's small and ineffectually angry shtick, I just wasn't sure if I wanted to head along to another comedy that seemed to have little more going for it than a mismatched pairing. But then I saw the tagline that they were using: "Saving the world takes a little Hart and a big Johnson." I laughed. I laughed even before I'd seen any footage from the trailer. Yes, I thought, I can buy a ticket and take a chance on this one. Of course, I would have been all for it sooner if I'd realized that this was co-written and directed by Rawson Marshall Thurber, the man who gave us We're the Millers and the eminently quotable Dodgeball. The man just knows how to tickle my funny bone. But could he make it 3 for 3 from the ones I have seen? Hart plays Calvin Joyner, a man who is starting to worry that he may have peaked in high school. He's managed to marry the love of his life, Danielle Nicolay, but there's not much else that he's overly enthused about. One Facebook friend request later, he meets up with Bob Stone, Johnson. Bob used to be bullied at school because of his old surname, his body shape, and his habit of singing along to En Vogue in the shower, and Calvin was the only one who ever helped him out when he needed it most. The two enjoy some beers and some nostalgia, and then, before you can say, "Wuss," see the film. It all starts to get twisty and turny, with the revelation that Stone now works for the CIA. But is he one of the good guys? Some of the people pursuing him don't think so, and Calvin can't be sure as the fists and bullets start to fly around him. What Thurber does so well here, alongside co-writers Ike Barinholtz and David Stassen, is exactly what we've seen done so well in other recent action comedies, such as Get Smart, Spy, The Other Guys, and even, although I didn't love it, American Ultra. The comedy works well, in this case mainly thanks to the chemistry between Hart and Johnson, but the action sequences are given equal care. And another recent trend that I've enjoyed in these movies, viewers aren't expected to laugh at the stupidity of the leads. They have their moments, sure, but these are two men who are far from complete idiots. One is way out of his depth, while the other's is an amusing dichotomy of lethal skills and a sunny disposition. There's very little to say about Johnson now that hasn't been said before. The guy is a man-mountain of dazzling charisma, bulging muscles, and great innate comedic ability. Hart brings his usual fast-talking and quick wit to the proceedings, and his other main selling point is surely the fact that he always somehow manages to give his potentially irritating characters a sweetness and concern for others, sometimes. He's an ass, he's sometimes a liability, and he's not the man you always want by your side in a dangerous situation, but he's all Hart. No pun intended. Amy Ryan also does well in a small role. Jason Bateman enjoys being a douchebag for almost all of his screen time, and Aaron Paul enjoys playing someone in a movie that finally just lets him have some fun. There's plenty of familiarity here, including those already mentioned. This also runs a bit close to the basic premise of the do-over. And, more importantly, there are plenty of laughs. And if they can come up with an idea for a sequel, then I will be on board, without any hesitation. Like many children of the 1990s, I was and have been a huge fan of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson since he wrestled in the WWF, later WWE, and continued to be a fan as he successfully transitioned from wrestler to successful Hollywood actor. Unlike many people today, I am not that big a fan of Kevin Hart. His shtick as a comedian, i.e., I'm short, black, and get into zany situations because of this, tends to wear thin on me very quickly. Having said that, the comedic duo of Hart and Johnson is, pardon the pun, rock solid in Central Intelligence, and the movie as a whole is a funny and entertaining action comedy. The film centers around two former Central High School students as they approach their 20-year high school reunion. Calvin Joyner, Kevin Hart, was the most popular kid in high school, but is now a miserable accountant who hates his current lot in life. Bob Stone, The Rock, formerly Robbie Weirdicht, was an unattractive, unpopular student who was mercilessly bullied in high school. Bob viewed Calvin as his only friend after the latter showed him kind mercy during a terrible school prank. Bob is now an incredibly handsome, badass CIA agent who needs Calvin's help to stop a plot to steal access to the USA's satellite grid. The film is directed by Rawson Marshall Thurber, who wrote and directed the highly regarded cult comedy Dodgeball, a true underdog story. He co-wrote and directed Central Intelligence, and the film's story deserves some credit for not only being funny, but for also tackling the traumatizing effects of bullying. The Rock's character, Bob Stone, was bullied in a terrible incident in high school that still haunts him despite his remarkable new physique and abilities. On the other hand, Calvin is struggling to deal with his underachieving and boring life as an accountant. The film also deserves credit for its lightness in tone, which allows for fun, intense action shootouts and fight scenes, where almost no one seems to die. Its comedic set pieces are also quite good, especially a scene in a psychiatrist's office, which is downright hilarious. The film wouldn't work if its two leads weren't funny or lacked chemistry, and thankfully neither are a problem. The Rock is hilarious as a weirdo and badass extraordinaire who loves unicorns, fanny packs, and his good friend and idol, Calvin Joyner, aka the Golden Jet. Kevin Hart has never had a problem making fun of himself for being short, but he does a good job playing a befuddled straight man who's being forced to go along with The Rock's seemingly insane plans. Calvin is forced by Bob into increasingly stressful, dangerous, and hilarious situations, putting a strain on their budding friendship. Central Intelligence has already made a ton of money and will probably get a green light for a sequel soon, which would be fantastic. If you're a fan of solid action, excellent comedy, Kevin Hart or The Rock, then go see this movie. It's a buddy cop movie with a great set of leads, solid tone, and a decent plot. The bottom line is, the film is funny and entertaining, and that's all you can ask for in an action comedy. Action star and former wrestler Dwayne Johnson and Kevin Hart, it's a pairing which, on paper, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Their acting styles, Hart's jittery, syncopated, rapid-fire delivery versus Johnson's laid-back physicality, are so starkly contrasting that it's almost like watching two musicians simultaneously playing completely different pieces. And yet, in this goofy comedy, the casting harmonizes perfectly, and a decent but patchy screenplay becomes one of the funnier films of the summer. Johnson plays Bob, once a bullied, overweight geek, now a physically imposing CIA agent. Hart is Calvin, the high school golden boy who is now a mid-level accountant. Calvin was one of the few students to show kindness to Bob, and Bob clings to this. Now, days before their high school reunion, they reconnect through Facebook. And Calvin finds himself roped into international espionage with a man who may or may not be a deluded sociopath. It's a plot that doesn't hold up under scrutiny, particularly in the scattershot climax, but the gag rate is so high that this doesn't matter as much as it should. The main revelation here is Johnson, who pulls off a tricky characterization that juxtaposes Molly Ringwald fandom and a penchant for unicorns with the ability to rip out a man's throat with his bare hands. I'm going to tell you a secret. I thought Central Intelligence was funnier than The Nice Guys, the other buddy cop type movie of the summer. It may not be as tightly scripted a thriller, but the chemistry and role reversal Dwayne Johnson and Kevin Hart bring to the screen is delightful, and it felt good to laugh at something not coming from a dark place. Hart plays Calvin Golden Jet Joyner, who is shown at the beginning of the film receiving a most likely to be successful award right before high school graduation. He's popular and driven and well-liked, and everyone is sure he'll go far. Cut to 20 years later, right before high school reunion, and he is stuck in a mid-level position at an accounting firm, feeling like he may have peaked all those years ago. Johnson, on the other hand, plays Robbie Weirdisht, who starts the film as a friendless fat kid and the victim of a very cruel prank by the high school bullies. Now, he's grown up to be The Rock and a CIA agent, and he never forgot Hart's small act of kindness to him, leading him to looking Calvin up and inviting him out for a drink. Soon Hart is involved in international espionage and black market deals and double crossings and satellite codes. It doesn't really matter. The spy plot is a little bit nonsense and thin, but what does shine through is the charisma and comedy prowess of the two leads. Johnson's Robbie is a cheerfully weird dude who wears a fanny pack and likes unicorns, and you can tell Johnson's having a blast playing against type. Hart makes a great straight man, far less shrieky and gay panicky and Napoleon complexy than I've seen him before. Well, a little bit those things, but less. So, even if you find his usual style annoying, he's worth checking out here. Together, they play off each other's comedic personas to produce several laugh-out-loud moments. This is the main difference between the laughs from Central Intelligence and The Nice Guys. I certainly smirked at the jokes in The Nice Guys. It's a movie that shines a light on human ugliness and absurdity and tells us we're better than the characters. Central Intelligence's jokes may poke fun at Robbie's weirdness or Calvin's fish-out-of-water status, and it unabashedly goes for the sentimental ending, but it's a sentimentality that feels earned. Calvin and Robbie want to do the right thing, and it's not pettiness or incompetence or laziness that prevents them. The comedy isn't mean-spirited or punching down, and, sometimes it's nice to take a break from bleak and grim. Ultimately, Central Intelligence may not display the same level of craft or acerbic verbal wit that The Nice Guys does, but it is the perfect light summer fun. I would be happy to see another Johnson-Hart pairing in the future, perhaps with a stronger plot to go along with their talent. In the meantime, Central Intelligence can be a palate cleanser before the next batch of black comedies. Early in the movie, Bob Stone, nee Robbie Weirdisht, Dwayne Johnson, the former fat kid turned CIA agent, and Calvin, the jet joiner, Kevin Hart, the former BMOC turned accountant, returned to their old high school, which, for Bob, was the scene of countless humiliations. The deepest was probably the one that opened the movie, when bullies toss Robbie stark naked into the middle of a school assembly. Everyone laughs, except Calvin. He's sympathetic and gives him his Letterman's jacket to cover himself up. Robbie Bob never forgot that small act of kindness. He also never gave the jacket back. Anyway, back in the old hallways, Calvin tries to bring this up, the humiliations, but Bob dismisses them, saying he doesn't even think about them anymore. Here's the secret. You know what I did, Jet? I took all that stuff and I balled it up real tight and then I shoved it way down deep, and I just pretty much ignore it. Calvin, that sounds really unhealthy, Bob. The movie has a few such laugh-out-loud moments, and this was my favorite. I've loved The Rock since late 90s WWF. I actually watched that shit for a while, and Hart since seeing the Z-Shirt sketch on SNL, and the two have great chemistry together. They're the reason the movie works as well as it does. Plus, we get a few choice cameos, particularly Jason Bateman as the former high school bully who may or may not have found religion. But overall, meh. It's another opposites-attract buddy action comedy, with Hart playing the staid guy and Johnson the well-meaning but potential crazy CIA agent who may have gone rogue. This last bit is supposed to provide tension throughout. Is Bob really a traitor when it does no such thing? Might as well ask, is The Rock a traitor? No. So why bother? Because it gives Calvin no way out, since even the CIA is after their asses, I guess. But the way the filmmakers prolonged the tension into the last reel was insulting. Not to mention this, in the end, Bob gets his redemption at the high school reunion, while Calvin gives up his staid job for a life of action in the CIA. I.e., he leaves behind the job most of us have, if we're lucky, for something that, when I was growing up, was morally suspect. CF collar flag. Of course, since 1995, the CIA has had liaisons in Hollywood and have looked better as a result. Maybe accountants need a liaison. The screenplay was written by two Mindy Project dudes, Barinholtz and David Stassen, with an assist from director Rawson Thurber, who also wrote directed Dodgeball and We're the Millers. His next project is We're the Millers 2. Yes. Sadly, bullied as a teen for being overweight, Bob Stone, Dwayne Johnson, shows up to his high school reunion looking fit and muscular. While there, he finds Calvin Joyner, Kevin Hart, a fast-talking accountant who misses his glory days as a popular athlete. Stone is now a lethal CIA agent who needs Calvin's number skills to help him save the compromised U.S. spy satellite system. Together, the former classmates encounter shootouts, espionage, and double crosses while trying to prevent worldwide chaos. I've mentioned a few times on here that I'm not the biggest Kevin Hart fan, since I find he plays the same type of role in every film where he always comes off as annoying. I thought things would be different this time, teaming up with Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. The concept looked interesting enough with The Rock as a secret agent. The idea of him being a secret agent seems plausible enough. Despite that, it still looked familiar to Hart's other films, but I still decided to give this one a chance. We've all seen the trailers featuring The Rock in a CGI fat suit dancing around in the shower. The film doesn't waste any time explaining this by establishing the baseline of his character, Bob Stone, starting his evolution from a fat teen to the fit and muscular guy we all know today. The worst of his fat teen experience had to be when he was shamed by being thrown out naked in front of his old high school. This event scarred him and continues to scar him today. Just because he's managed to change on the outside, he still hasn't changed on the inside. These feelings still manifested themselves a few times throughout the film, showing us that Stone is more of a human being than just a caricature. Calvin Joyner, Hart, was the only guy who was ever nice to Stone in high school. He had so much potential, being the most popular guy in school and voted most likely to succeed, but ended up as an accountant. Once his 20-year high school reunion comes along, he starts to miss his glory days. Things start to get better or worse for Joyner when he runs into the new Stone, who is now a CIA agent. Of course, Joyner doesn't know this at first, so when he does, he reacts in a way that any Kevin Hart character would. I'll let you use your imaginations for that one. He does not want any part of what Stone has planned for him, and Stone is oblivious, or maybe not to this, and drags him around from danger to danger. A lot of the comedy here comes from Joyner's unwillingness to go with Stone. This was hit or miss, as the material here felt a little forced and was very similar to past Hart films. It is very clear early on that Joyner is not the kind of person who would ever do this by having him be a mostly serious character, as much as Hart can be, but that predictably doesn't last. The rest of the comedy is from Stone. He was just so over the top here, but it worked. Stone was very confident in his abilities and always acted as if everything was a game. He was just hilarious here with some great lines and moments. He stole almost every scene he was in, as his personality kind of overpowered a lot of the scenes. He just made everything feel fun. This included the action scenes, which were fun to watch as well. The Rock was very capable with the action here, doing all the cool action-y stuff and disposing enemies with ease. His chemistry with Joyner was great here as well, creating a more believable and compelling pairing than with Ice Cube and Will Ferrell, and probably with other people from movies I haven't seen. They were definitely fun to watch together here. Joyner is a very similar character to past Hart roles, but this was a little more forgivable here because he just seemed to work better with Stone. While he still came off as a little annoying, he wasn't as bad this time as the writing was a little better here. Johnson and his performance was the best part of the film. The fact that he and Hart are great together almost makes up for the plot, which was, without giving anything away, iffy at best. There were a lot of inconsistencies here, but most people will focus on the Stone-Joyner relationship anyway. The film also features a few cameos, which were great. Overall, this was a very fun action comedy with some good performances by Johnson and Hart, but the story kind of brought it down a little. The new movie Central Intelligence tells the story of Robbie, Dwayne Johnson, was bullied at high school. The only person Hal was nice to him was Calvin, Kevin Hart, the coolest kid in school. 20 years later, Calvin is a bored accountant, and Robbie is Bob Stone, a CIA agent. Bob enlists Calvin in a dangerous spy mission, despite the protests of the surprised accountant. Rated, Central Intelligence is M for violence, sexual references, and coarse language. Do you enjoy bromances, movies like Wedding Crashers or I Love You Man, or buddy cop comedies from the 1980s? Central Intelligence is basically a combination of those two things. What's good? Dwayne Johnson is best known for being a wrestler and an action movie star, but he's a really funny bloke whose performance in Central Intelligence is one of the best comedy turns in yonks. He's sympathetic, believable, and daggy as a super spy with issues. While this bromance buddy movie isn't anything terribly new or amazing, Johnson is enough reason to check it out. But there is also the underlying plot about the impact and consequences of bullying children, which is a worthy subject to raise in a mainstream movie. What's not? Kevin Hart struggles to match the presence and timing of his co-star Johnson. Several cool cameos show up throughout Central Intelligence: Aaron Paul, Jason Bateman, Amy Ryan, but you will want to see much more of them. The action on screen is uninspired and predictable, and the plot gets sillier as it goes along. While there isn't as much swearing or smutty talk as most adult comedies, both do show up throughout. Spiritually speaking, a strong undercurrent in Central Intelligence is the lifelong impact of bullying upon people. Although the film's finale presents an anti-bullying message in terms that even primary school kids would find childish, how great it is that a mainstream Hollywood comedy has a go at bullying. One scene stood out to me, where a character describes how God has broken into their life and helped them see how the bullying they did was terrible. This character explains how life has meaning and purpose, and sometimes you have to ask people to forgive you for the wrongs you have done to them. Why? Because the forgiveness God offers to us should drive us for the wrongs we have done. Whether it is bullying or some other terrible thing, turning away from and stopping such behavior is possible. The good, everything about this, made me think I wouldn't like it. I generally dislike Kevin Hart in all films that he's in, but weirdly I like his stand-up. However, I do love Dwayne Johnson. With some fairly mixed reviews, I went in with low expectations and was pleasantly surprised by how much I enjoyed this film. Okay, so it isn't a life-changing, award-winning film, but for the most part I enjoyed watching it. It's pretty by the numbers despite its unrelenting attempts to keep you guessing with the plot, and is really just a vehicle for Hart and Johnson to try and outdo each other with over-the-top performances and jokes. In the two leads, we have a double act in the truest sense of the word, perfectly balancing and complementing each other. Their chemistry was easily the thing I enjoyed most about this film, and the noticeable drops in momentum when they weren't on screen together further emphasized their effectiveness. Dwayne Johnson in particular was great. He didn't play the stereotypical tough guy that I was expecting, and he has surprisingly impeccable comic timing. The plot may be severely lacking in depth, but with Johnson's character, there were a couple of strangely touching moments. Hey, when I've sat through Grimsby and Dirty Grandpa, which were severely lacking in any redeeming qualities, and between them had the emotional capacity of a teaspoon, I'll take what I can get. Central Intelligence delivers exactly what it promises: laughs and action. It's not big and it's not clever, but not all films need to be. The laughs in this film are very one-note, and if it wasn't for the chemistry of Hart and Johnson, it just wouldn't work. If you're not laughing in the first 10 minutes, it's unlikely the rest of it will make you laugh, as it is pretty much more of the same. The plot is a very loose construct built around the central relationship and is pretty flimsy in places. The constant double bluffing gets pretty tiresome by the end, but I tried not to think about it too much. Probably for the best. If you found Kevin Hart annoying before this, then this film will do nothing to change your mind. The Hart-isms are turned up to 11, and personally I found his repeat the jokes until they're funny shtick a bit grating. Considering he has a background in comedy and Dwayne Johnson's was a wrestler, but yet completely outshines Hart, says a lot. That being said, there's plenty of people who love Kevin Hart, and his energy is infectious, which still makes for a highly watchable performance. The verdict: I saw this movie, and you should too. Look, Sometimes a completely throwaway watch once and enjoy yourself film is fine, and this is definitely one of those. It made me laugh enough, and whilst it's not one you should rush out to see on the big screen, it is probably still worth your time. Of course, comedy can be incredibly subjective, so if you think it's the sort of film you won't enjoy, then you're probably right. However, I thought I'd hate it, and I actually kind of liked it. The chemistry of the leads and Johnson's performance alone make it worthwhile. It might be lacking in intelligence, but at least it's fun. Agree with everything I've said, or am I a totally misguided idiot who has got it all wrong? Let me know in the comments below. I'm not quite sure how to approach Central Intelligence. It's a peculiar film in that it misses several of its marks, yet somehow manages to overcome its shortcomings just enough to make it worth seeing. It's billed as a sort of awkward buddy action movie, and I suppose it is that. It's got some fun action scenes, though it doesn't depend on them. And as a comedy, sometimes the jokes are a bit too broad and lowbrow. But what it really is an oddly charming story about fitting in and being yourself. A surprisingly sweet tale about living through your past and coming to grips with your present. I know I'm surprised at that too. There's a solid supporting cast floating around them too. Amy Ryan as a by-the-book CIA agent who thinks Bob's gone rogue, Danielle Nicolet as Joyner's tough but sweet wife, and a couple of fun cameos that elevate the story quite a bit. Director Rawson Thurber does a good job of creating fun rapports in the more character-driven scenes, which is no surprise given his success with films like We're the Millers and Dodgeball. And while the action is, perhaps thankfully, not Michael Bay-esque, it's just zippy enough, with enough daring-do and humor to keep us interested. Central Intelligence is never going to have the quotability of Dodgeball or the outright bonkers insanity of We're the Millers. As I mentioned, it's funny but not hilarious, and while its hijinks are certainly goofy, it's not quite as inspired as it sometimes seems to want to be. But that's okay in the end. Johnson and Hart are the real story here, and they're goddamn fun to watch together. Each playing off the other's strengths with remarkable and enjoyable charisma and comedic charm, and it's always nice to see Johnson using both his physicality as well as his natural comedic chops to full advantage. It's not blockbuster fare, but it's a solid, sweet flick that even when it slips, still manages not to fall too hard. There is a theory here at Views from the Sofa that Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson can increase the quality of a film by at least double. This is ably proven by Central Intelligence, which is as generic as could be. It is a buddy action comedy and follows the same patterns many other in this genre have. It has one action star and one comedy star, something which has been followed closely in films from Twins all the way to the Rush Hour trilogy. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, though, and as long as the film has decent laughs and thrilling action, it can still be a success. Luckily, in the comedy corner, there is Kevin Hart. Hart is everywhere and continuing to dominate Hollywood, essentially playing the same character in every movie. Here is dusts off the same shtick again, playing a wimpy small guy who is out of his depth, shouting and squirming as the action plays out around him. Hart has made a name for himself in this role because he is very good at it, though, and that hasn't changed here. Not that Hart is the only one delivering the comedy. Johnson can hold his own too and has the great timing, which makes him such a successful action star. His chemistry with Hart is clear, and they definitely had a laugh making this movie. Moments work much better because they are some comfortable with each other. And although some clearly ad-libbed moments sometimes don't come off, it is worth it for scenes like Hart slapping the rock while getting therapy. So with the comedy covered, the action had to hold up too, and Central Intelligence does a good job on this front as well. The first act is Johnson forcing Hart into action scenarios he doesn't want to be part of, so when the bullets and explosions start, the ingenuity is in how Johnson uses Hart without his consent. It makes for some very cool moments which are closely followed by some laughs. Unfortunately, this only gets you so far when a film is this generic. Johnson and Hart's chemistry is good, but soon the movie must put the laughs aside and focus on the action, story, and the bullet-filled finale. Nobody who is a fan of this type of movie will be surprised by the third act, and it plays out in predictable fashion. Again, this isn't bad. It just stops Central Intelligence from being anything but a throwaway action comedy. Overall, Central Intelligence is fun, entertaining, and very funny. It makes the most of its 2 stars, and Johnson and Hart have great chemistry. It isn't anything you haven't seen many times before, though, which isn't bad, but isn't necessarily great either. Directors and writers, before you get your panties all twisted in a bunch, allow me to elaborate. Buddy comedies stem from a formula that has a long track record of success. You've got the Lethal Weapon series, Beverly Hills Cop, 48 Hours, Rush Hour, The Nice Guys, The Other Guys, 21 Jump Street. You put all these movies together, and one successful central theme holds true in them all. Putting a very unlikely duo together to accomplish some task that drives the movie. You do this, and 9 times out of 10, you'll have a hit on your hands. It's those buddy comedies that do a little something extra that really stand out to me. Central Intelligence follows that buddy comedy formula wonderfully and succeeds in being a good movie, however, doesn't do much in the way of standing out as one of the better ones. 20 years ago, Rob Weirdicht, Dwayne Johnson, was the laughingstock of his school as his heavy weight made him an easy target. Calvin the Jet Joyner, Kevin Hart, was the only one that came to his aid during a particularly embarrassing time. Fast forward to the present, and Weirdicht is back with a new name, Bob Stone, and The Rock's physique. He connects with Calvin out of the blue, which ends up taking them both down a path of espionage, tracking down government codes, and running from both bad and good guys alike. The plot is a bit murky in some places. There are parts in the movie where I found myself asking, wait, what happened to who? Completely normal for a spy movie, but this is supposed to be a comedy, and I'd really prefer to check my brain at the door. While it didn't ruin the overall experience of the movie, it was a bit of a blip. This comedy definitely accomplishes its main goal of being funny. It's always the unexpected moments catching me off guard that make me laugh the most, and this movie will give you a few of those. Hart and Johnson pull this movie off, largely in part due to their great chemistry. Hart is in the middle of a midlife crisis, still chasing after the life he promised his wife they would have, while Johnson is trying to run away from his past and be someone completely different than the fat kid in high school. While Hart's character was pretty one-dimensional, I thought Johnson's character was developed extremely well and added value to the overall story. Not only does your heart go out to Rob Weirdicht for the pain of his past, but you find yourself rooting for him to find that one true friend. Rob is a geek by accident, someone who is a nerd and doesn't know it. It's hard to imagine finding a 6'4" mass of muscle endearing, but you do. Some of the jokes were a miss for me, but you can't expect them all to be funny. I love Kevin Hart's stand-up, but as an actor, you're predominantly seeing him in niche roles. It's a role he does well, but leaves you thinking, again? Even as a black man, I feel beat over the head at times with the constant black jokes, so I can only imagine the lack of inclusion other races must be feeling when they hear that repeatedly. On the one hand, I get it. It's a direct reflection of the society we still live in, and trying to take those stereotypes, talk about them, and make them funny. Then again, how can we ever hope to fully unify as a society if it's black this and white that? It's definitely a fine line. The words action comedy go together not just because the movies they describe combine action and comedy. They go together because, in a machine-tooled lark like Central Intelligence, each one becomes the other. The dialogue, as quick and aggressive as a punch to the face, really is a form of action. The gun battles, car crashes, and hurtling bodies are staged with a more mayhem the better lightness that turns violence into something to giggle at, as if it were all transpiring in a Roadrunner cartoon. At least, that's the idea. Hart is a good match for him, but he doesn't get enough good lines. After a fight, when he says to Bob, "You were like Jason Bourne, man, but with jorts," the moment has a snap to it. But though his delivery is ace, hardly any of Hart's dialogue surprises you. It's mostly rote fear and ranting. There's a halfway funny scene in which Bob pretends to be a couple's therapist who keeps slapping Calvin, and Jason Bateman, in an unbilled cameo as Bob's old high school tormentor, has a stylish nastiness that momentarily steals the movie out from under the 2 stars. It's enough to make you wish that Central Intelligence didn't turn into a kind of straight-up thriller, mostly out of laziness. It's easier to do variations on the same old cloak and dagger crapola than it is to elevate horn-locking irritability into true banter. Bob is out to nail the Black Badger, a mystery agent who, it seems, has murdered his partner and plans to sell U.S. satellite encryption codes to the highest bidder. But Bob's boss, played with brusquely appealing heartlessness by Amy Ryan, thinks that Bob is the Black Badger, and the way this plays out is just competent enough on a spy game level to make you momentarily forget that you didn't buy a ticket to Central Intelligence to watch a third-rate Bourne film in jorts. You bought that ticket to laugh. You will not do it quite enough. Central Intelligence plot summary. After being bullied in high school, Bob Stone, Dwayne Johnson, reunites with the only person who was nice to him, big man on campus, Calvin Joyner, Kevin Hart. Calvin's mundane life turns upside down when Bob turns out to be a CIA agent on the run. The best way to describe my experience watching Central Intelligence is to imagine you're a kid at an ice cream store, and some jackass runs in and knocks all the ice cream over, leaving nothing left for you to eat. Sad and painful. This certainly isn't the worst comedy I've ever seen, but its problems are so commonplace. I feel like a broken record. I just saw this with pop star Never Stop, Never Stopping. At least that film knew what genre it was. Mockumentary. This movie is such a convoluted mess. Not only do we get a bad comedy, but a terrible bully drama and spy movie, all rolled into one predictable, generic, unappealing dish that looks like it was worked on by 9 different chefs. This movie has no clue what it wants to be, and we all suffer because of it. Before we get into the characters, let me set up how lazy this comedy is. I even shudder to use that word, comedy. The first scene is fat dancing Dwayne Johnson. We knew it was coming. It sucks. We're moving on. It's the next scene that really pissed me off. We go to Kevin Hart's office where Ryan Hansen plays his coworker who acts like the most cliched frat boy in the history of movies. His jokes consist of, "Look at the dick app I just created," and even uses the word promosh to describe another coworker getting promoted. At one point, he even chants about boobs when he thinks a stripper walks into the office. This is why I get really bent out of shape when people accuse me of being nostalgic for the old comedy days when they trot out this tired old douche of a character. Cut me a break. Kevin Hart plays Kevin Hart. What else do you want me to say? He can be funny, but the script is so obviously written for him that there's no character whatsoever. He was a high school star. Now he's a boring accountant. He wails and yells while bullets fly everywhere. The end. While Hart was forgettable, I have to give credit to Dwayne Johnson, who never ceases to amaze me. He's a good actor. He's given atrocious material here, including a plethora of 90s phrases. What? What? But still manages to be charming and charismatic. For what it's worth, the two have good chemistry. If there was an actual script written, they could do something funny. In addition to the generic characters, the jokes are so bad that they even explain themselves. We get the typical jerk at the bar who uses the word bro a lot. Yup. The movie thinks it's clever when Kevin Hart actually makes a joke about how many times he says bro. That's not clever. That's admitting you have nothing original to offer. Even when they hit on something mildly amusing, the writers crap all over it. Kevin Hart's wife in the movie, played by Danielle Nicolet, who isn't bad, makes a clever Goodfellas reference. Okay, that was good. But then they have to ruin it by having Kevin Hart literally explain that it was a good reference. Wow, I need to watch Seinfeld to cleanse myself of the awful comedy. Aside from the uninspired humor, this movie goes to another level of pissing me off when it actually tries to guilt me into liking it. One of the big themes is bullying. There's a moment where Dwayne Johnson's character encounters his former bully, and it's very sad and melodramatic. It's almost as if the movie knows it sucks, so they design a scene to make critics feel like crap for giving it a negative review. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 tried to do the same thing with the kid at the end. How dare you? I'm not saying anti-bullying isn't important. It obviously is. But that doesn't mean I have to suffer through a subpar movie so we can get to the hackneyed anti-bullying PSA. If this was a stronger film, maybe I'd appreciate it more. It goes to show how lost this movie is. It can't decide on a genre. I like both Kevin Hart and Dwayne Johnson. They have winning personalities, beaming smiles, and great screen presence. I'm not sure if either one of them is nearly as funny as he thinks he is, though. It's the same way with Central Intelligence, their new buddy cop comedy. It's an agreeable picture with some outrageous jokes, wacky setups, and a few harder-edged action scenes to spice things up. A laugh riot, it is not. Most of the attempted humor comes from Hart playing his type and Johnson playing against type. Hart, by virtue of his diminutive height and comedic personality, is always the nervous Nelly trying to front that he is cooler, tougher than he really is. Johnson, playing a lot of hyper-masculine action roles lately, is a dweeb who loves unicorns, fanny packs, and cinnamon pancakes. This really is part of his cover as CIA agent Bob Stone, formerly the fat kid in high school who was the subject of a cruel prank. Johnson's body is digitally morphed onto another actor's body for the flashback. He's grown up into a tower of muscles who can take out a handful of bad guys without even blinking. There's no cockiness to him, though, and in fact, Bob is in awe of Calvin the Golden Jet Joyner, Hart, the BMOC in high school. Flash forward 20 years, and his promising life has turned into disappointment, a nowhere job in forensic accounting, a fantastic wife, Danielle Nicolet, but no kids. He's just stuck. Bob shows up out of the blue and invites Calvin for drinks, which turns into a bar fight, which turns into a sleepover, which turns into CIA agents showing up on his doorstep, claiming Bob is a rogue agent trying to sell vital intelligence to the highest bidder. From there, the movie is a series of chases as Calvin tries to decide if Bob is on the level or not, in between fistfights and shootouts. Amy Ryan leads the hunt, and Jason Bateman turns up in an uncredited role as one of Bob's former teenage tormentors who seems to have experienced a change of heart. Directed by Rawson Marshall Thurber, from a screenplay he co-wrote with Ike Barinholtz and David Stassen, Central Intelligence is all broad humor and telegraphed punchlines. For instance, when Bob encourages Calvin to replicate the backward flip he was famous for back in the day, we just know it's going to come in handy during a pivotal fight scene. They do manage to sneak in a few clever throwaway jokes, such as Bob calling Calvin a snack-sized Denzel for his performance in fooling some bad guys. I can't quite recommend this movie, but I didn't hate it. It just needed to be funnier and not take aim at the most obvious jokes possible. Sass and charisma will only take you so far. I'm at a loss for words. When I went to see Central Intelligence, I expected an innocuous buddy spy comedy, but I wasn't ready for how virulent it would become. This is one of the most problematic films I've seen in a while. Not based on any technical aspects, but purely based on the outdated and harmful stereotypes it projects. The first thing you'll notice about this film is how easily you can identify whose voice the film is written in. By voice, I am of course referring to the film's perspective and the cultural point of view that inevitably bleeds into everyone's work. When you make what you consider art, there is always an injection of yourself in the work because it is made from your own personal experiences, ideals, and values. The entire film reeked of cis-white hetero male bias. One IMDb search later, it was all confirmed. Director Rawson Marshall Thurber, We're the Millers, Dodgeball, has experience with comedy and knows how to visually set up gags, but has absolutely no idea on how to frame and shoot action sequences. There were a handful of fight scenes where the shoddy camera work and poor tracking shots muddled every motion and turned it into an unrecognizable blur. The camera work, while visually distracting, is not responsible for the main offenses of this film. They are just the superficial coating hiding a repugnant story underneath. I was just as shocked to see it took 3 people to write this screenplay, and they were all cis hetero white men. Now, you may be wondering why identifiers like race and sexual orientation matter. As I mentioned before, it is because of the film's voice. The story is written for the leads, 2 men of color. That makes all the stereotypical jokes that much worse and insidious. It does, however, make sense when you see the amount of black cultural appropriation committed by the white characters. Some of these crimes may be explained as Kevin Hart's own on-set improv, but even then, that doesn't excuse it. I had hoped that this is as bad as the film would get, but it continued to push boundaries beyond race and into sexuality. There's a running gag between Johnson's character and Hart's, where Johnson displays his friendship through hugs, while Hart rebukes him for fear of appearing homosexual. Johnson's character, who is obstinately anti-bullying and completely secure in his sexuality, is forced to defend Hart from a group of homophobic bar patrons. A good thing to note is that another of the film's running jokes also involves Hart's perceived femininity because of his petite frame and high-pitched voice. Johnson takes care of the encounter by immobilizing the three men, but not before scolding them for their homophobia. This was wonderful and made Dwayne Johnson the only redeemable character in the film. Unfortunately, this would prove to be a hollow gesture that is probably meant to balance out all the homophobic remarks and gestures we would see in the rest of the film. This film is under the assumption that you can include homophobia as long as there is some sort of counterbalance. But one scene championing equal rights and over a dozen demonizing it is in no way balanced. Any other week, and I would have mentioned this occurrence and left it at that. But the recent Pulse mass shooting is a reminder that this deadly prejudice is still a problem, and films like Central Intelligence are part of the problem. Having Hart's character reacting repulsed over the possibility of outsiders questioning his sexual orientation when Johnson hugs him in public is dangerous. It reinforces a toxic and rigid idea of masculinity, which in turn promotes outdated gender roles and non-heterosexual persecution. Two men doing something as trivial as hugging or holding hands or even kissing should never be answered with prejudice, let alone violence. The film doing this for laughs doesn't make its effect any less pervasive or surreptitious, as Sunday's events in Orlando are proof of when a man killed and injured over 100 people only because he didn't like the idea of two men kissing. For good or evil, this is the potential power in a film's voice. Everything involved since the film's inception, and probably before that, is the very definition of white privilege, but it was taken one step forward by stereotyping other races and injecting casual homophobia. Those people who find themselves drawn to this film solely on the prospects of seeing Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson shirtless will be disappointed on this front as well. This only happens once in the entire film, twice if you count his CGI-ed face on someone else's body. By the time it finally does arrive, you're so disenchanted by the entire film that even Johnson's muscular physique won't change your sense of disgust. The only intelligence even remotely close to being in Central Intelligence involves your decision not to see the film. That would be the smart thing to do. Here's definitive proof that a single performance can make an entire film. The premise of Central Intelligence is simplistic and underwhelming. A former high school star turned Jobsworth accountant teams up with former bullying victim turned CIA agent to take down a terrorist mastermind. The script is equally lazy, and leading man Kevin Hart as the office drone offers his usual tiresome, overcooked, look at me, I'm being funny shtick. So thank the movie gods for Dwayne Johnson, who delivers a performance of such charm, such unexpected goofiness, that the screen practically glows every time he appears. It doesn't begin well. We first meet Johnson in a creepy CG-enhanced fatsuit as a chubby teenage nerd Robbie, whose horrible high school experience is relieved only by the kindness of Calvin, Hart, football hero and student most likely to succeed. But 20 years later, it's a different story. Calvin is washed up and bored with his dead-end life, while Robbie has become a globe-trotting super spy with a fetish for unicorns. There's literally nothing unlovable about Johnson's performance, hitting a perfect balance point somewhere between traumatized adolescent, unbreakable superhero, and overexcited man-child. Think a peak form John Candy trapped in the body of, well, The Rock. And even more impressively, he makes it all look completely effortless. Breezing through the movie while Hart jumps frantically up and down and stuff explodes pointlessly in the background. I'll start off by saying, I'm not the biggest fan of Kevin Hart. It's not like I have a big dislike for him, I just don't find him particularly hilarious. But I love The Rock. I'll watch anything with him in it, especially in a comedy role. The plot of Central Intelligence is relatively simple. Two former high school friends meet as their reunion approaches. But what was thought to be a harmless meetup soon turns into a chaotic conspiracy. Kevin Hart plays Calvin Joyner, a normal guy leading an ordinary life. Dwayne Johnson plays Bob Stone, a CIA agent who was heavily bullied in high school. Together, they make quite the pair. Months ago, we saw their Instagram war, with videos of them trying to take selfies. This showed us they had chemistry, and it's excellent this carries over on screen. They both bounce off each other, in a contrast that certainly delivers. Although the plot doesn't really hold up, with each twist creating another gaping plot hole, you won't mind due to the amount you'll be laughing. There are welcome cameos throughout also, including Jason Bateman, with a performance that mirrors his horrific character in The Gift. To sum it up, Central Intelligence's far-fetched plot doesn't do it any favors. However, coming from someone who isn't a big fan of Kevin Hart, this film has changed my opinion. I continuously found myself laughing at Hart, but the star of the show here is Johnson. Watching him rip a guy's throat out and act like an awkward teenager makes for comedy gold. This isn't the most memorable film, but it delivers on laughs. The bar for studio comedies has sunk so low that when one comes along and doesn't bludgeon you with its ineptness, there's a temptation to lavish praise on it. With that in mind, moviegoers looking for a quick fix of summer escapism could do worse than Central Intelligence, in which an enjoyably matched Kevin Hart and Dwayne Johnson star as odd couple partners in CIA hijinks. Fast, funny-ish, and moderately entertaining, the film also is notable for what it spares us. There are no penis jokes, no gags involving farts, diarrhea, or projectile vomit, not that I'm categorically opposed to those, no faces getting smashed with basketballs or other flying objects, no shouty kids, scolding wives, or scantily clad sex pots, and only one brief slow-mo shot of the leads strutting toward the camera in smart suits as rap plays on the soundtrack. Directed by Rawson Marshall Thurber, We're the Millers, Dodgeball. From a screenplay written with Ike Barinholtz and David Stassen, The Mindy Project. Central Intelligence demonstrates an above-average interest in story and character, and tries, if not always successfully, to craft real comic situations and action sequences. It's been made with a certain level of polish and professionalism, and it capitalizes on the chemistry between Hart and Johnson, who convey what seems like genuine delight in each other's company, something that gives this romantic diversion a giddy kick. I don't want to overstate the case. The film doesn't come close to the heady, high-low-brow brew of last summer's exemplary espionage spoof, Spy. Nor does it deserve to be cited in the same breath as seminal buddy movies like 48 Hours, or even the irresistible 21 Jump Street reboot. But in a season of particularly joyless tentpole offerings, Central Intelligence is at least a breezy watch, and, whatever its shortcomings, doesn't reek of the utter, can't-be-bothered laziness that has become the damning hallmark of the Hollywood comedy. From there, the plot thickens with lots of talk about encryption codes and the Black Badger, the CIA agent Bob claims is the real villain, as well as extended cameos from Aaron Paul, Jason Bateman, and a certain uncredited comedy queen. Thurber and the screenwriters have fun staging 3 different flashbacks of the same contested event, providing further evidence that the film is a notch more narratively alert than many others of its ilk. That said, no one's coming to Central Intelligence to see the director riff on Rashomon. They're coming to see Johnson sausaged into Hart's pajamas, don't ask. The 2 stars staring dually into each other's eyes as part of a couples therapy intimacy exercise. Again, don't ask. Or Johnson kicking butt while Hart fusses at his side like a chihuahua nipping at the heels of a Rottweiler. I'm not sure the visual juxtaposition inherent in the central pairing is as amusing as the filmmakers think. Twins Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito spoiled us for life in that department. And the role reversal the movie's marketers have been pushing is a stretch. Calvin may register as the straight man on the page, but Hart plays him at his usual manic, endearingly irascible pitch. Bob is nerdy and neurotic on the surface, but put a gun in his hand and an enemy in his way, and he's every bit the cool, charismatic Johnson we've seen in HBO's Ballers, San Andreas, and other films over the years. Still, Hart's shtick feels more focused and finely tuned here than in the slapdash ride-along movies or last year's dismal The Wedding Ringer, and it's a tribute to Johnson's growing versatility that he's credible as a man who could be either a cold-blooded killer or a lovable lug. The dialogue in Central Intelligence is hit or miss, but there are chuckle-worthy touches throughout, including a photo of a teenage Calvin as Hamlet in the school play and a recurring gag in which Ryan's CIA agent nonchalantly tases Hansen's corporate kiss-ass, an example of the right way to wring giggles out of violence. The film's anti-bullying message is obvious, but never drags on the pace or tone. Moreover, that message and the mindless laughs that Central Intelligence serves up along with it are things we could use now more than ever. Central Intelligence is a funny action-adventure film starring Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. It's filled from bottom to top with crude humor and over-the-top action sequences. It's been 20 years since high school, and Calvin's life isn't quite what he pictured. Finding himself at a dead-end accounting job, he begins to wonder what he's doing with his life. He soon finds himself reconnecting with an old high school friend and is suddenly thrown into the middle of a spy hunt. This movie was less entertaining than I expected. It had a little more crude humor than I usually watch. The story was rather straightforward and predictable. The action scenes were over the top, and the stunts were unrealistic. Despite all of that, though, I managed to still enjoy the film. I usually like most of Dwayne Johnson's movies, and he was the single saving grace for this one. I wouldn't recommend Central Intelligence to anyone, but I also wouldn't warn against watching it. It was an okay movie. It had some funny moments, and it kept a good pace. Watch at your own risk. At the very least, the new action comedy Central Intelligence will be remembered for opening against the Pixar cash cow Finding Dory, if not for anything else. It marks the first collaboration between two of the most ubiquitous presences in movies over the past 4 years. The media machine, known as Dwayne Johnson, and Kevin Hart, who doesn't have the capability to turn anything down, whether it's hosting the MTV Movie Awards or an off-Broadway production of Webster. If you need somebody to do less intelligent version of Dave Chappelle, you know who to call. To be fair, Central Intelligence is a pretty fun 2 hours at the movies. Not as bad as you'd expect, but not as good as you'd hope. Even if you choose to miss it, I'm sure The Rock or Kevin Hart will come out with another movie in a couple of weeks for you to ignore. Fun fact. Since 2013, The Rock and Kevin Hart have starred in 52 films. One of them is actually good, maybe. Hint, it has the words Fast and Furious in the title. The plot seems perfunctory, as it's merely a hook for a series of gags that work for the most part. The filmmakers utilize and accept that the funniest part of the movie is seeing the size difference between The Rock and Hart in same frame. Julia Louis-Dreyfus pointed out the inexplicable hilarity in seeing someone really short and someone really tall in the same shot, and Central gives you that in spades. The movie opens in 1996. The Rock plays Bob Weirditched. Yes, it sounds just like that. He's fat and has no friends, and gets picked on by the school bullies because he's fat and he has no friends. Remember in the heyday of the 90s, when the only school shootings you had to worry about were drive-bys? Sigh. It's the final assembly of the year, and generic white bullies pick a naked Bob up and parade him in front of the school. They are not all about that bass. The only one to offer him any aid, in the form of a letterman's jacket, is the class president Calvin Joyner, Kevin Hart, in a subtle 90s fade playing the Kevin Hart character he always plays. Flash forward 20 years, and Calvin is leading an unfulfilling life as an accountant. Having studied accounting, I'm not really sure you can have a fulfilling life as an accountant. Calvin married his high school sweetheart, but something is missing. He refuses to go to his high school reunion later that week because he's not really that proud of what he's become. What could possibly snap him out of that rut? How about a Facebook friend request from Bob Stone? Calvin accepts, even though Bob doesn't even have a profile picture, just that blandly creepy blue head. In real life, has anybody actually accepted a friend request from a bluehead? Yes. Karen Guilford did in 2014. She did it just to be nice, and then was later killed by said bluehead. John Cold Storage also did in 2011. He was killed and eaten 2 days later. It turns out that Bob Stone is really Bob Weirdished, but grown up and looking like The Rock, which still doesn't explain why he hasn't changed his profile picture. Bob and Calvin have a bromantic meet-cute, "You look sexy as Doc," in which Calvin realizes that Bob has never really let go of what Calvin did for him that fateful day at the gym. Almost to a startlingly sycophantic degree, Bob then beats up bullies, "I don't like bullies," who are picking on Calvin. They then drink some more, and somehow Bob weasels his way into sleeping over at Calvin's house. As a favor, Calvin looks over some accounting files and surmises that it's an auction site. Bob accidentally spills water on Calvin's laptop and borrows his too tight pajamas and sleeps on his couch. The next day, Central Intelligence agents appear at Calvin's house. Bob Stone is wanted by the CIA, and now Calvin is now shoulder deep, hip deep to more normal-sized people, in trouble. What doesn't work with Central Intelligence? A lazy plot written by David Stassen and Ike Barinholtz, along with 3 other credited writers, is barely held together by Hart and Rock's chemistry. It features a laughable red herring and a generic bad guy you can spot the moment he/she appears on screen. Bitch. For a movie featuring the word intelligence, the story doesn't have a lot of it. Not sure if it's a good thing. Part 2. Not sure it's a good thing that the end credit outtakes get bigger laughs than anything in the movie itself. At least you'll be leaving with a smile on your face. For a comedian who has yet to show good form in feature films, Kevin Hart is certainly laughing all the way to the bank, as the hugely successful American stand-up comedy master has yet again, with Central Intelligence, hit pay dirt. Even though his feature-length material fails to add up to anything more than an experience that provides a few chuckles but missed the mark badly in concerns to story and hearty, memorable laughs. After big roles in films like Grudge Match, Ride Along, About Last Night, The Wedding Ringer, Get Hard, and now this film, Hart is stringing together quite the list of mediocre films that have failed to capitalize on whatever charisma the performer seems to possess that has made him such a drawcard in the American marketplace. Whereas comedians turned movie stars like Eddie Murphy and Adam Sandler found initial success in their transitions to the big screen, Hart is walking a tricky line of never achieving the success many of his counterparts have found with their films that still manage to entertain to this day, and not even the teaming up with Dwayne Johnson here can bring out the laughs like it could have. No stranger to hitting comedy high notes and seemingly a fan of partnering with Hart, the 2 performers will next be seen together in the Jumanji remake. Johnson gets some easy laughs as high school fat kid turned Jason Bourne, like Super Spy, Bob Stone, who reunites himself with Hart's one-time high school kingpin turned sad sack accountant Calvin Joyner. But Dodgeball director Rawson Thurber never finds the right balance needed to make Central Intelligence truly take off. And while the film even tries its hand at some uneasy action sequences, even at 100 minutes, Central Intelligence feels like a joke that wears out fast, after the initial funnies of The Rock with a bum bag and unicorn t-shirt wears off. Appealing to the somewhat low common denominator that modern comedy audiences have sadly come to know and love, Central Intelligence isn't the worst comedy you'll watch this year, but it's still a long way off being much more than a background diversion, future TV rerun Big Shot, and another forgettable entry into the increasingly disappointing Kevin Hart feature film catalog. It's always nice to see Johnson using both his physicality as well as his natural comedic chops to full advantage. It's not blockbuster fare, but it's a solid, sweet flick that even when it slips, still manages not to fall too hard. Extra information. I really wasn't sure whether or not I wanted to give my time over to Central Intelligence despite the fact that I'm a huge fan of Dwayne Johnson, and despite the fact that I always tend to at least chuckle at Kevin Hart's small and ineffectually angry shtick. I just wasn't sure if I wanted to head along to another comedy that seemed to have little more going for it than a mismatched pairing. But then I saw the tagline that they were using, saving the world takes a little Hart and a big Johnson. I laughed even before I'd seen any footage from the trailer. Yes, I thought I can buy a ticket and take a chance on this one. Of course, I would have been all for it sooner if I'd realized that this was kitten and directed by Rawson Thurber. The man who gave us were the Millers and the eminently quotable Dodgeball. The man just knows how to tickle my funny bone. But could he make it 3 for 3 from the ones I have seen? Hart plays Calvin Joyner, a man who is starting to worry that he may have peaked in high school. He's managed to marry the love of his life, Danielle Kay, but there's not much else that he's overly enthused about. One Facebook friend request. Later, he meets up with Bob Stone Johnson. Bob used to be bullied at school because of his old surname, his body shape, and his habit of singing along to En Vogue in the shower, and Calvin was the only one who ever helped him out when he needed it most. The two enjoy some beers and some nostalgia, and then before you can say what's up, see the film, it all starts to get twisty and turny with the revelation that Stone now works for the CIA. But is he one of the good guys? Some of the people pursuing him don't think so, and Calvin can't be sure as the fists and bullets start to fly around him. What Thurber does swell here, alongside co-writers like Barinholtz and David Stassen, is exactly what we've seen done so well in other recent action comedies, such as Get Smart Spy, The Other Guys, and even Although I Didn't Love It, American Ultra. The comedy works well in this case, mainly thanks to the chemistry between Hart and Johnson, but the action sequences are given equal care and have another recent trend that I've enjoyed in these movies. Viewers aren't expected to laugh at the stupidity of the leads. They have their moments, sure, but these are two men who are far from complete idiots. One is way out of his depth, while the other's is an amusing dichotomy of lethal skills and a sunny disposition. There's very little to say about Johnson now that hasn't been said before. The guy is a man-mountain of dazzling charisma, bulging muscles, and great innate comedic ability. Hart brings his usual fast talking and quick wit to the proceedings, and his other main selling point is surely the fact that he always somehow manages to give his potentially irritating characters of sweetness and concern for others. Sometimes he's an ass. He's sometimes a liability, and he's not the man you always want by your side in a dangerous situation. But he's all heart, no pun intended. Orion also does well in a small role. Jason Bateman enjoys being a douchebag for almost all of his screen time, and Aaron Paul enjoys playing someone in a movie that finally just lets him have some fun. There's plenty of familiarity here, including those already mentioned. This also runs a bit close to the basic premise of the Stuber. And more importantly, there are plenty of laughs, and if they can come up with an idea for a sequel, then I will be on board without any hesitation. Like many children of the 1990s, I was and have been a huge fan of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson since he wrestled in the WWF, later WWE, and continued to be a fan as he successfully transitioned from wrestler to successful Hollywood actor, unlike many people today. I am not that big a fan of Kevin Hart. His shtick as a comedian, I'm short, black, and get into zany situations. Because of this, tends to wear thin on me very quickly. Having said that, the comedic duo of Hart and Johnson is, pardon the pun, rock solid in Central Intelligence, and the movie as a whole is a funny and entertaining action comedy. The film centers around two former Central High School students as they approach their 20-year high school reunion. Calvin Joyner, Kevin Hart, was the most popular kid in high school, but is now a miserable accountant who hates his current lot in life. Bob Stone, the Rock, formerly Robbie Wicht, was an unattractive, unpopular student who was mercilessly bullied in high school. Bob viewed Calvin as his only friend after the latter showed him kind mercy during a terrible school prank. Bob is now an incredibly handsome, badass CIA agent who needs Calvin's help to stop a plot to steal access to the USA satellite grid. The film is directed by Rawson Marshall. Thurber, who wrote and directed the highly regarded cult comedy Dodgeball, A True Underdog Story, he co-wrote and directed Central Intelligence, and the film's story deserves some credit for not only being funny, but for also tackling the traumatizing effects of bullying. The Rock's character, Bob Stone, was bullied in a terrible incident in high school that still haunts him, despite his remarkable new physique and abilities. On the other hand, Calvin is struggling to deal with his underachieving and boring life as an accountant. The film also deserves credit for its lightness in tone, which allows for fun, intense action shootouts and fight scenes where almost no one seems to die. Its comedic set pieces are also quite good, especially a scene in a psychiatrist's office, which is downright hilarious. The film wouldn't work if its two leads weren't funny or lacked chemistry, and thankfully, neither are a problem. The Rock is hilarious as a weirdo and badass extraordinaire who loves unicorns, fanny packs, and his good friend and idol Calvin Joyner, aka the Golden Jet. Kevin Hart has never had a problem making fun of himself for being short, but he does a good job playing a befuddled straight man who is being forced to go along with The Rock's seemingly insane plans. Calvin is forced by Bob into increasingly stressful, dangerous, and hilarious situations, putting a strain on their budding friendship. Central Intelligence has already made a ton of money and will probably get a green light for a sequel soon, which would be fantastic if you're a fan of solid action, excellent comedy, Kevin Hart or The Rock. Then go see this movie. It's a buddy cop movie with a great set of leads, solid tone, and a decent plot. The bottom line is the film is funny and entertaining, and that's all you can ask for in an action comedy. This film, directed by Ross and Marshall Thurber. Screenplay by Ike Barinholtz. David Stassen, Ross and Marshall Thurber. Story by Ike Barinholtz. David Stassen, produced by Scott Stuber, Peter. Principato, Paul Young. Michael Feudal, starring Dwayne Johnson, Kevin Hart, Ryan. Aaron Paul. Cinematography. Barry Peterson, edited by Mail. Brian S. Music by Theodore Shapiro. Ludwig Ganson Production Company's New Line Cinema. Universal Pictures. RatPac-Dune Entertainment. Perfect World Pictures. Bluegrass Films. Principato Young Entertainment, distributed by Warner Brothers Pictures, United States and Canada. Universal Pictures International. Release dates June 10, 2016 in Regency Village Theater, June 17, 2016 in United States. Running time 108 minutes. Country United States. Language English. Budget $60 million. Box office $217 million. So guys, this is the review of Central Intelligence movie and some information about it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting. And if you like this video, please like it, share it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.